And the trip that Odin had made with Wolden into the tunnel, that was the most heartbreaking of all. The Brons and the Neeblings had saved the treasures from the warring civilizations of the world above. The statues could be preserved. Some of the machines might possibly be restored. But the paintings, the art, and the books, all gone. Wolden especially mourned a Navajo sand painting, which he compared to Goya. Not a trace was left of it. Wolden had taken him into the tunnel, just as he had once before. It was dripping now, and the sound of the pumps throbbed through the ruins like the struggling heart of a wounded thing. Their little car moved slowly down the old tracks. Occasionally it had to stop, where some disintegrating pile of treasures had spilled out. One sack of diamonds had broken. Wolden stopped and kicked the stones away. An ancient Ford, with its back seat piled high with rotting and sprouting stacks of prize-winning oatseed, was both heartbreaking and ludicrous. The Brons and the Neeblings had been the true antiquarians of the world, and they had taken centuries to gather their collection. A dinosaur skeleton stared at them. The savage carved prow of a galleon leaned against the gaping whale's jaw. A model of the first atomic pile supported a score of leaning spears, but the feathers and artwork on those spears were now stains and shreds. An English flag, delicately embroidered, drooped beside the dripping tatters of the Confederacy. A Roman eagle was lifted high beside the crudely beautiful banner of the Choctaws, on which Odin could barely make out the 3 arrows and the unstrung bow. Chinese vases, thin as eggshells, most of them broken, lay in a tumbled pile beside ancient cradles and spinning wheels. A Neanderthal skull was staring hungrily at a 12-foot skeleton of a giant bird, and a restoration of a tiny little Equus was looking up like an inquisitive mouse at a huge, ruined painting by Rosa Bonheur. Thousands upon thousands of relics of the world above, some taken from the jetsam of the sea and others taken by exploring parties from Opal during those long glad years when the inner world was as comfortable as Eden and almost as happy. Gems by the millions, gold and silver coins, trappings inlaid with diamonds, furs, silks, bone instruments and ivory carvings. A Stradivarius was warping apart, and a Gutenberg was swollen to twice its size, its moldy pages curling away from the parent book. The books had fared worse. Great stacks of leather-covered libraries were turning into moldy, starchy mounds. Papyrus and lambskin scrolls were falling apart. Once, when they stopped for Wolden to thrust some moldy folds of Hindu thread of gold weaving from their path, Odin stopped and picked up the cover of a book. It was soggy and faded, but he could make out the title. Poems by a Bostonian. So they had gone on, but slower now than on their first journey into the tunnel which led to the floor of the gulf. An odor of dankness and decay hung over everything. The air was cold and damp, and everywhere were the footprints and handprints of Death who had spared this galley for so long, but who had come back with his flashing scythe to claim his own. The stinking carcass of a hammer head shark, washed in by the flood, lay sprawled across the sodden sarcophagus of an Egyptian princess. And a gloomy sickness fell upon Jack Odin there in the tunnel as he thought of all the splendor that had died there, and the ages and ages of sweat and blood that had gone into these treasures. 1,000 treasures were trying to whisper their stories to him, but the dripping water was drowning them out. Thousands of men, some slaves and some kings, were trying to tell him what the jewels and books and swords and cradles had meant to them, but the drip, drip, drip of the water choked the echoes of their voices. The darkness that was ever crowding in seemed to be filled with the shadows of beautiful women in their fine laces, with flashing jewels about their throats and pendants brushing their half-covered breasts. They were trying to smell out of the dank, but a cold fog was creeping from the walls of the tunnel, settling above the shadows and driving them back, farther and farther into all-pervading nothingness. Seeing his misery, Gunnar had clenched Odin's arm. "These were things of the past, Nors King. and the things of the past belong to the old dragon. Let us not complain if he has taken them at last. We have things to do, and we cannot do them if we are sick at heart. Did I tell you that 4 of my children died in the flood?" The voice of the broad-shouldered dwarf sounded husky and far away. "No, Gunnar, you never told me indeed, my old friend. I am sorry. Very sorry, and am ashamed that I sit here mourning the past and forgetting your troubles." "Yes, they died. My Frida and the other 3 are coming here, and we will eat at the same table again, and I will tell them that their grandsire and their great-grandsires were men among men, and that Gunnar himself has often sat high at the councils. Then we will go out to find Grim Hagen, and Frida and the 3 will go back to rebuild the farm. For that is the way of things, and as long as there are strong ones left to rebuild, Loki cannot altogether destroy us." The car moved slowly forward. The dismal fog grew heavier, until at last they came to the place where the old ship had stood. Now there was a new ship taking form within its huge cradles. Lights were everywhere. The red lights of the forge, the blue lights of the welding torches, the white light of the workbenches. The yellow lights that surrounded the high scaffolds went up and up to the top of the hourglass figure. "This is our second," Wolden explained. "Our first was much smaller. We had been working on a smaller model long before Grim Hagen got ambitious. Some of our scientists have already gone into space. We are in touch with them. They went quietly and noiselessly. There was no need for all the destruction and havoc that Grim Hagen worked. But this model is larger even than the old ship, and all the improvements that we once dreamed of are here. You see, Odin," Wolden continued, "the old ship was ours for centuries. We of Orthgard have exploring minds. We went over the ship thousands of times. We knew where every bolt and pin was located. We improved it. In the beginning, when it brought our ancestors here, it must have been comparatively slow. But during the past 40 years, we learned much from your scientists about space. Einstein was the only thinker in a century gone mad from bickering. About 10 years ago, we perfected what I call the fourth drive. It would take days to explain it, but it can throw a ship into trans-Einsteinian space. We had equipped the old ship with the new invention. Our experimental drive was so equipped, and this newer, larger one will also have the fourth drive. But we have made a few improvements at the last." It was all too deep for Odin, and there was so much to see that he did not ask any questions. Workers and smiths were everywhere. They crawled over the scaffolding like ants. They hammered and pounded at the framework. They were bent over furnaces and anvils. The presses and shapers were pounding away. Never before had Jack Odin seen so much activity in Opal. "We are wrecking our building for this ship," Wolden warned. "Given time, my experiments would have made worlds and space unnecessary. But it has been voted that we go after Maya and punish Grim Hagen. Even though we drive to the edge of space, so be it. We are now building in weeks what would have once taken years to do. Those on our experimental ship who have already gone out into space, they have helped us immensely. Daily they report the results of their tests to us. The good points, the bad ones, the improvements. Oh, when this is finished, it will be a greater ship than we ever dreamed of. I did dream of such a ship when I was young. Now I find I do not want it. Even so, I will go out among the stars. Wolden was never a coward, nor his fathers before him." "So be it," Odin answered, and he leaned his head back and looked high up at the scaffolding where the welders' torches flashed like stars. "So be it, Wolden, but I would have gone anyway." And Gunnar spoke. "I would have gone beside you. My sword is thirsty." High up on the hourglass shape, a bit of magnesium caught fire and burned brilliantly for a second, its sparks flashing out and down. A worker, who was no more than a shadow, smothered the flame. The sparks